Aloha, friends. This is Gemini Brett of More Than Astrology, here to talk about sacred astronomy for astrologers and EA Zoom meetings. This is an image of me last month at a heiau in Kauai, a sacred space in Hawaii. And so what am I doing here? This is an image from this morning, November 30th, from San Anselmo, California, where I am right now. And I'm wondering what you see here. I see this and these guys. This is Jupiter and Mars, and also two very bright stars just next to Mars, the star Spica, and up and to the left, Arcturus. Well, Arcturus in the top left of this image, and then down towards the bottom right, bright blue is Spica, with Mars just to the left there. Mars currently is at 24 degrees Libra, and in the tropical zodiac. And this is where Spica and Arcturus both live. But if we know the ecliptic, and Jupiter will help us see this because the planets stay close to the zodiac, the ecliptic plane, we'll see how much closer Spica there just next to Mars is to the plane of our orbit than Arcturus is. So if you look at a list of where fixed stars project to the tropical zodiac, there doesn't seem to be any difference between Arcturus and Spica, but isn't there for Mars here? I think it's a cool question. I don't think there's necessarily an answer. It really depends on what you feel the zodiac is. And that's, I feel, a very wonderful question, and one that's not often asked. And there's so much confusion about what the zodiac is, especially because signs and constellations are very things. So learning to see the ecliptic in space with our face is one way that we can approach this great mystery. Learning to see the ecliptic, the meridian, learning the constellations, the fixed stars and where they align to the zodiac of your choice is a way that we can learn to see the chart in the sky. Of course, only the 7th through 12th houses, the houses above the horizon, but that will allow us to finish the circle and feel into the rest of the chart, which in a way allows us to look below the ground. Here we see the cross of matter inside the circle of spirit, the earth glyph, which is not always a perfect plus cross. Now, I really love to bring in these artistic images of the constellations, for they have so much starry story connected to them. So this is today at noon Pacific time in California, where I am. And if we zoom in, we'll see that all of the visible planets besides Moon are all gathered into one space. And of course, we can see this in the chart as well. This is Antares, where the sun is now aligned as it is once a year. In fact, the exact alignment will be at full moon coming up on December 2nd or 3rd, depending on where you are. Antares, the heart of the scorpion. Jupiter is aligned to Zubin el-Janubi, the fulcrum of the scales, which used to be known as the southern claw of the scorpion, as the scorpion used to be drawn holding the scales, but now the fulcrum, the scales, Zubin el-Janubi, maybe the star with the coolest name of all time. And this Spica, the shaft of wheat that the priestess holds. But I see these stars as the heart, the scales, and where Mars is aligned to Spica. I see that star as the feather of Ma'at. Ma'at, who is truth and wisdom. And why I see it this way is because there's a great story from Kemet, the land we call Egypt, that the soul in a way will be, well, I guess judged by whether or not the heart is as light as the feather of Ma'at, who is truth and wisdom. So we see the scales and the heart and the feather, and I see this as this story in the sky. The feather, the scales, the heart, all on the way, zodiacally speaking, to the galactic center where we see Saturn and Mercury now conjoined. In fact, it's almost an exact conjunction between Mercury and Saturn right now on the chart, and yet they don't look right on top of each other. Why is that? And the answer to that last question, as well as what's the difference between Arcturus's 24 Libra and Spica's 24 Libra, is latitude, which also shows up as declination in another way. So this great story of the weighing of the heart, it feels to me to be alive in the sky, and something as we make our way towards the Golden Gate, which many traditions suggested was the place where our souls will go. Well, soul's sun goes there in our time at December solstice. So here's another image of the weighing of the heart with Horus seated on the throne, Horus Ra's sun. And a lot of these planets now, which are so close to the sun, are just at this point in their cycles, their synodic cycles, as we gaze at them from Earth, in reappearing from their time of disappearance or about to disappear, going under the beams. This is a term from the Hellenistic tradition, under the beams. And this is another image I took this morning. You can see the beams there. It's that yellow stuff. And when planets are under the beams, they can't be seen. They're too close to the sun. It's too bright in that space to see planets there. Oops, it's not Venus. And sometimes Jupiter and Mars and Mercury. This is Venus this morning. Venus who's now just within 10 degrees of the sun. So in the Hellenistic tradition, it's usually taught that 15 degrees from the sun is under the beams. That's when a planet can no longer be seen. As we can see here, this is not true. Often these days, as I was taught in the shamanic astrology school, and many peers like Adam Gainsberg and Gary Caton will use this kind of astronomical convention for Venus, the brightest, that when she's within 10 degrees of the sun, she can no longer be seen. That begins what's called her heliacal set as a morning star, and she will disappear from our eyes for 60 to 100 days as she literally astronomically moves behind the sun. And this to me is a very significant thing, you know, as a experiential, sentient, observational astrologer. But here she is within 10 degrees and still quite visible. So we have to be careful with these rules. Mr. Jones here, why? There's this scene in Indiana Jones where he talks to his students about you've got to get out in the field, right? You got to do the field work. And this is something that I really am happy to be part of in astrology, of this movement of renaturing our craft. And I'm really honored to have the opportunity to bring folks outside under the sky. And for me, I mean, that's just where I receive so much of my reflections of what I've been learning academically, but then also experiential understanding. And my reality comes from the planets and the stars themselves. Many people think of me this way, right? Because I'm kind of known, I have this rap of being the astronomy guy in our community. I'm not the only one. And here's these Gemini twin telescopes, but that's not really my trip. The telescopes are cool and I value a lot of the information we get from them, but they narrow our view, right? They look so far away in space, so far back in time. And through this very narrow view, I'm more into these kinds of observatories and connecting to the sacred sites of old and seeing how the ancients celebrated this marriage of heaven and earth. So this is how I spend a lot of my nights. This is an image from the spring in Sedona, Arizona. And there's my head right with Maesa, the head of Orion, which is actually the stars that define the nakshatra, where the moon was when I was born. And to the right of the image in the Hyades, that V, which is the face of the bull, the bright star Aldebaran, the bull's eye, where our coming full moon, Gemini full moon, will be. And that's my rising star, right? So this wasn't just a portrait of me. So people wondered what side of this debate I was on. It was happening on Big Island in Hawaii the last few years. The native people fighting not to have another telescope put on their sacred mountain. And it's really not even the challenge for me, I'm with the sacred site every time. And what I want to express and share is astronomy for astrologers, not through telescopes, although we can build some really fun instruments like stone circles and totem poles and sundials to help this quest. But it's a way to understand how the chart is the poetic breath of nature. It's a reflection of the moment that's happening in nature, not just some representation of a symbolic language. And what I'm doing here is a little shadow work, as I like to say. And this is because the sun works like a clock. Sorry, I didn't mean to bring Bill Nye to an astrology webinar. Anyway, how about this astrology clock? 24 hours of time. This is really the clock in the sky. And the clock that we use, analog clock like this, is actually modeled on the sun's motion in Northern Hemisphere skies. So I wanted to take us into a quick dance with the two motions, the two astrological motions. The secondary motion is that which we as astrologers are more concerned with, are primarily concerned with the secondary motion, which is the zodiacal motion. As the earth revolves around the sun, we see the sun in the backdrop of the different signs, moving from Aries to Taurus to Gemini, etc., which is actually west to east. Whereas the primary motion is the diurnal motion, a result of the spin of the earth. So sun moves in this direction according to the primary motion, rooting, rising, reaching, resting, rooting, every 24 hours, right? The earth spin. And this has often been called the same because the planets all follow that motion around the same rate, while through the zodiac, we know they're very different. Moon circling the zodiac in 27 days on average, and Saturn about 29 and a half. So what do we see here? We can just see from this chart that it's about to be an eclipse. The moon is applying to conjoin the sun for new moon right at Rahu, the north node. Actually, this is an image of August 20th, 2017, before the day of the total solar eclipse. And I wanted to show this because as I play this through a video, what we're going to see is moon, sun, nodes moving together clockwise according to the primary motion, the diurnal motion. The reason is the earth, which is the center of the chart, is spinning counterclockwise. But we will also see moon moving from the west to the east according to the zodiacal motion faster than sun does. And this is why we witness eclipses from the west to the east. Though moon and sun are rising together in the east and heading towards the west, moon eclipses the sun from the west to the east. We got about 50 emails at the time of the eclipses. Why is that happening? All right, so this 24-hour clock I see in this way: the rise, the reach, the rest, and the root below the ground. The cross of matter inside the circle of spirit. The cross of matter, the earth glyph, is the horizon, and the meridian line. The meridian line is north-south. And the circle of spirit is the zodiac. It's the place where the sun dances, rising in the east, and then moving sunwise, which in the northern hemisphere is clockwise. We used to call this sunwise. In the southern hemisphere, it's actually counterclockwise because you face north where the planets reach their peak, and that puts east on your right. We do not see this on charts for southern hemisphere skies, and it's not something I'm going to dig into so much today, but hopefully another time. The chart, like the clock, was built experience of the northern hemisphere above the Tropic of Cancer as far as what the sun does or what moon does as she rises and reaches and rests and roots, or Sirius or Jupiter or Spica. Okay. So in the northern hemisphere, we move from the east sunwise, which is clockwise, and we reach at the midheaven due south. due south. So if you're standing due north of something like this, and the sun due south of you finds its way to this midheaven marker, you know it's noon, not clock noon, but apparent noon, local apparent noon as it's called, when the sun souths in the Northern Hemisphere. This is midday, halfway between sunrise and sunset. In the Southern Hemisphere, this is when the sun norths, midday. And that's outside of the tropics. Between the tropics, the sun can do either the work of the Northern Hemisphere or the Southern Hemisphere. Also a long and fantastic story, and not for today. So from the Northern Hemisphere point of view, when the sun souths, this is midday. And we've created markers to track this daily motion throughout time. And the yearly motion as well, right? Because while the sun is always south, in the Northern Hemisphere anyway, at midday, and that's the midheaven, it's not always at the same altitude or the same height, right? In the Northern Hemisphere, we know 0 degrees tropical Cancer is summer solstice. And from there, the sun will get lower and lower in the sky. Its lowest point being December solstice, winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere, between both equinoxes. And so we can see this on a solar pole, if you want to consider this obelisk with a cross on it to be that. Say this is the highest the sun ever gets on that obelisk from a specific place that you sit every day. Well, if you see that, you know it's summer solstice. And then day after day, the sun is going to get lower and lower on this pole. If you're sitting in the same space, every time the sun hits the pole, you know it's midday. But you can also tell where you are in the year by the altitude of the sun. So Northern Hemisphere, 0 Cancer, summer solstice, the highest altitude of the midday sun, and then it descends. Leo, Virgo, which brings us to equinox, and the sun continues to fall. Libra, Capricorn, Sagittarius, bringing us to December solstice. Yeah, the lowest altitude of the midday sun in the Northern Hemisphere. And then, like a goat, we begin to climb. Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, bringing us back to equinox, the same height as that transition between Virgo and Libra. September equinox we will find on this pole at March equinox between Pisces and Aries. And we climb even faster now. The Ram, Taurus, and Gemini. The signs next to the pole, the signs that have similar altitude, shown here at the midheaven. If you're sitting due north in the Northern Hemisphere of a pole like this, the pole's due south, that's where the midheaven is, always. And when the sun is there, that's midday, always, but changing altitudes. But altitudes are shared by pairs of signs. Signs are paired in what's called anticia. It's an ancient technique, I'm sure many of you know. And this is one way we can witness anticia in nature. Pisces is anticia Libra. Well, 10 degrees Pisces is anticia 20 degrees Libra. Can you see why that would be? 2 degrees Taurus is anticia 28 degrees Leo. Can you see why that would be? 29 degrees Gemini, anticia 1 degree Cancer, you see. The shadow pairs of the signs, they've been called. All right, so in the Northern Hemisphere, rising in the east, reaching in the south. And if the sun is at its midday height in the southern sky, that means the shadow at midday will be pointing due north. That's the shadow work I'm doing here at this heiau. I had a iPhone that could cast a chart with me. I waited for the moment that the sun was exact the midheaven, and I raised my hand and took a picture and confirmed that this large stone, which felt very much to be like a throne at this heiau, the sacred space in Kauai in Hawaii, was directed due north, right at Polaris. If the sun was down, I would have seen it facing North Star. So this sacred space, like so many around the world, was aligned to the cardinal directions. Rising in the east, for the northern hemisphere, reaching in the south, resting in the west as it is worldwide, and then rooting below the ground at midnight, halfway between sunset and sunrise in the north. In the southern hemisphere, sorry, I don't have a slide for this here, the sun rises in the east, reaches in the north, rests in the west, and roots in the south. So we're due north of the Washington Monument, and it's hiding the sun, and suddenly you're sitting in a shadow. You know it's midday. But that thing could also be seen as a sundial. To the left, if you know DC, and I've done a 3.5-hour movie on DC and the star alignments there, you could check out sometime if you'd like. It's called The Star Mysteries of DC, Washington Deciphered. Strange things happening there. But let's see, the White House, which you can see kind of on the right, the White House is north of the Washington Monument. And to the left, it's called the Reflection Pool. Abe Lincoln Memorial's over there, west. So the shadow here is heading west, a bit north of west, which means the sun is what? A bit south of east. All right, so sun had risen. It's not quite noon, because at noon, when the sun souths, at midday, when the sun souths, the shadow would be facing the White House, you see. But knowing this primary motion of the sun in the sky, we can also see it on the ground if we're willing to do a little shadow play. And this image that I've shown again and again is actually of an obelisk, not in Egypt. It used to be there, but it was taken to Rome. This is right in the Vatican, in St. Peter's Square. And you can see this beautiful geometry that hosts this obelisk, aligned to the cardinal directions. Yeah. So you can see the shadow here too. It is almost midday. How do I know? Because the shadow is just west of north. Yeah, sun rising in the east, northern hemisphere reaching in the south. So the sun has not quite hit the reach, because when it does, that shadow will be facing due north. And then as the sun heads over to rest in the west, the shadow will move towards the east, right? So this is actually a sundial here at the Vatican. We saw if you were sitting due north and watched the sun climbing and descending throughout the course of the year at midday on the obelisk, you could tell not only that you're at midday, you could tell the hour of the day, but you can also tell where you are in the year. And you don't have to build a gigantic obelisk to do this if you're willing to do some shadow work. And this is done at the Vatican in this square. This line here projects from the obelisk towards the north. So at midday, the shadow will run due north. It will run on a meridian on the ground. And that's what this line is. It's a meridian line. You can see there, it says Cancer, yeah? Solstice in Cancer. And 22, I guess that must mean June. So when the shadow is at its shortest, right? Midday means the sun in the northern hemisphere is due south, and summer solstice means the sun is at its highest height, which means the shortest shadow of the year. So the shadow is facing due north, and the shortest shadow of the year is going to be right there. Do we know if it's Cancer or Gemini? No, it could be one or the other, right? Because 29 degrees, 59 minutes Gemini is just as much June solstice as is the first degree of Cancer. And these signs are in Tisha to one another. So pretty amazing that the Vatican has these solstice and equinox markers. Well, innocent enough until you take a closer look and you realize that there's a marker not only for the solstices and the equinoxes, but also for the astrological signs, tracking the months of the year astrologically when the shadow hits these meridian plaques, showing Pisces and Scorpio here. Signs that are not Anticia, but the shadow will be in the same place at the beginning of each. The Anticia pair of Scorpio is Aquarius, and of Pisces is Libra. So as the shadow from the fall Northern Hemisphere towards winter solstice is getting longer there as we approach the cross quarter we call Samhain, now Halloween, right? The shadow will extend to hit that Scorpio point. And then as we come back past Imbolc, the cross quarter between winter solstice and spring equinox, from Aquarius to Pisces, the shadow is going to return to the same plaque. Looks like the Pope loves some astrology, right? I mean, and obelisks. What's going on with this borrowed, or perhaps stolen, I guess might be a better word, obelisk from Kemet, from Egypt, and astrological signs coded into the Vatican? I mean, how many Catholics and Christians have told me that astrology is the devil? It's like, I mean, really? Anyway, I don't need to get all religious, political. Emails are coming. But it's a very interesting thing, you know, and this idea of obelisks in the Vatican, and many of these traditions from around the world, so-called pagan traditions, are really alive, and very alive, obviously, in astrology. And so much of astrology, even in hidden ways, goes back before the Hellenistic into ancient Kemet, into ancient Egypt. We know about the Sumerian roots. We know about so many of the Yodish or Vedic, Babylonian, and this beautiful happening in Alexandria in the Hellenistic times, when so many cultures and their wisdom were coming together, and Western astrology in a sense was born. But really, I feel this in my heart, and have found some textual confirmation and whatnot, which really feels to be true, is that they were bringing astrology, at least locally in Kemet in Egypt, out of the mysteries, out of the esoteric, out of the hidden, and to the esoteric, to the revealed. And so I think so much of astrology, including, I would argue, the tropical zodiac, which is said to have been born at that time. I feel it's actually a much older thing, personally. But so much of it was already alive in that land, but hidden, for it was magical. And these magical systems were not meant to be taught to the uninitiated. Iakos, I'm told, is how to pronounce this ancient Greek word. And this was the word that the Hellenistic astrologers used for the ascendant. They called it the hour marker. But Iakos, it's been said, means helm, like steering a ship. When I hear that word helm, I think of, you know, the great wheel. But that's not how it was on boats in those days. You steered with the rudder, which is actually, I'm told, a better translation for this word Iakos. And we'll hear from Dorian Geisler Greenbaum and her The Daimon in Hellenistic Astrology. In astrology, the hour marker, ascendant, is called Iakos, rudder of the chart, by which the native's fate is turned. It zodiacally represents the time and place where the child comes into being, manifest in the physical world, and thus subject to some kind of fate. Most of the lots whose very name prompts connection with one's allotment or fate project from this same ascendant. Ascendant, Iakos, rudder. Why would they call the ascendant the rudder? And so in modern times, we hear this a lot with Iakos, that it's because it's the steersman, that the Iakos, the ascendant, defining the first house, which is you, is because you are the navigator of your chart. Or if we want to look at this maybe more fatalistically, you know, I'm Gemini rising, and so from that tradition's point of view, Hermes or Mercury is the lord of my hour marker. I mean, maybe he's steering the ship, right? But there's a very physical, astronomical, experiential truth to why we would call the ascendant rudder. And this is why that Indiana Jones image also, we learn these things out with our boots on the ground and witness the heavens. And to me, this is really important to reclaim, as I did, this morning, that, yeah, so we have this convention, and we should have these conventions when we're reading charts of when a planet is under the beams, or maybe, Venus isn't 15 degrees, but 10 degrees when she disappears. But if we're not out there experiencing the astrologer, we're using a set of rules. In this case, a rule that would say with Venus or any planet's heliacal set when they disappear, or heliacal rise when they first appear after their time under their beams, they saturate the chart. Regardless of where they are, according to essential dignity in many of the ancient transmissions, they saturate the chart. And so if we're not out there watching like the ancients did, how will we know when that time truly is? How long does it last? So to get out and do some field work is what I mean, to do some science, and Bill Nye loves that, you know what I mean? Because to me, we'll get rid of Bill Nye for a second. Astrology is this beautiful, mystic, poetic breath of nature. It is more than just a symbolic language. And so when I feel into things like this, it's more than just some definition. And through my experiencing, I'm witnessing it in the world, as many of us have. And so this idea of the rudder, it really comes down to declination, or another way we could describe this movement of the sun or any planet on the horizons, rather rising on the eastern horizon or setting on the western horizon. Another great word is azimuth. Altitude, which we looked at before, is an angular measurement of a planet vertically from the horizon, 90 degrees being the zenith straight above you, 0 degrees being the horizon, 45 degrees being halfway between. Azimuth is a description of angular measure and a horizontal level. And the convention is that due north is 0 degrees or 360, because they're this one and the same, right? A full circle. East is 90 degrees, south 180 degrees, west 270 degrees. So here we're looking at the sun rising at 3 different times of the year. Solstice, this is a Northern Hemisphere image from Illinois, a farm. Equinox in the middle, summer solstice north of east on the left, and winter solstice south of east on the right. And one thing I love about azimuth is that this will be true anywhere in the world, Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere. It's a little trickier, actually, beyond the Arctic and Antarctic circles in very extreme latitudes. But the sun will move in the same direction during the course of the year. The sun dance on the horizons, regardless of hemisphere. The altitude business we were looking at before with Cancer is the highest sign on the pole. Well, we know that's the opposite in the Southern Hemisphere. It's Capricorn. It's Sagittarius and Capricorn at the highest signs of the pole, and Gemini and Cancer at the lowest, right? Well, everywhere in the world, Gemini and Cancer are the furthest north signs. So we'll look at this at equinox time, March equinox time, tropical, 0 Aries. And due east, the sun rising due east. But every day after equinox, the sun rises further north from Aries, Taurus, even further north of due east, Gemini, taking us to the northern extreme. 29:59, Gemini becoming Cancer solstice. Here's an image of summer solstice from Stonehenge, an alignment there encoded. Solstice, which means the stopping of the sun soul stops. Stops what? Well, it stops moving north, as it has since the other solstice, December solstice. And it pauses on the horizon for a few days. It turns around after stopping on the horizon, it turns around and begins its southern quest. Does this look familiar? How about now? And I guess what I'm arguing here is that the glyph that we use for the sign of Cancer describes this solstice, describes this movement of the sun to its northern extreme, stopping, turning around, and heading south. Like a crab that moves sideways. This glyph looks nothing like the constellation of the crab in the sky, but it works like this. Hi, Bill. Okay, and I feel that many of the tropical zodiac energies and sacred timings, the way that they work in nature, are described by the glyphs. Look at the sunrise beams. They actually do Aries, and in fact, if you're sitting east, and especially at the equator, right at the equator, stars that rise south of east will head to the south, and north of east will head to the north. All night long, there's this permanent fountain of youth. It's the Aries glyph. But if you could take the ground away, and the ground would be like that horizontal line we see in only 2 glyphs of our signs, you would see that stars are actually coming up from the south, due east, and then heading back to the south, coming from the north, meeting in the center, heading back to the north. And you get this Pisces glyph, right? Libra glyph on the other side, especially at the equinox time, at the equator, the sun setting on a vertical line directly into the horizon. So yes, the scales, absolutely, but I feel that this is what this glyph is transmitting to us. And we can play this game with glyphs all days, maybe another time. So end of Gemini, we become Cancer. And here we can see Antitia again in the pairs now by Azimuth. Aries, Taurus, Gemini taking us north of due east, and Cancer bringing us home to the cardinal directions. Cancer, Leo, Virgo, which brings us to what? September equinox, right? And Libra. And then we fall into the south. A better way to describe that word of fall, with leaves in the northern hemisphere, yeah, but literally also by altitude. The sun, as we saw earlier, is falling at that time, climbing in the southern hemisphere, where flowers are blooming. So Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius takes us to the extreme southern rise everywhere, and then we come back. Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, back to equinox, back to due east. And so here's another image of the Antitia pairs. The signs literally have homes on the horizons, both east and west. If the sun rises north of east, she will set north of west. Full moon's coming our way very soon. Sagittarius sun on December 2nd or 3rd, depending where you are. As Sagittarius sun sets south of west, the Gemini moon will rise north of east. As Sagittarius sun is very low in northern hemisphere skies, the Gemini moon will be very high. As the Sagittarius sun is very high in southern hemisphere skies, the Gemini moon will be very low. But on the horizon, this north to south is the same for northern and southern hemisphere alike. And I feel that our tropical zodiac is not seasonal, but rather a result of the same thing that the seasons are a result of. And this is the directions, the medicine wheel, something that the ancients all around the globe were certainly connected to. And we see evidence of it in the sacred sites. Here's one that I've been tracking, Olawalu, a petroglyph site in Hawaii and Maui. I mean, all I've read from academics is it's like, you know, basically, and sorry, this is a sad way to say this, but this is what I read, you know, and there it's like heathens drawing pictures, you know, so much more than that. And I noticed this, I was here the first time on my birthday, it was October 24th, 2015. I got there after a swim with turtles, and it was setting a little too much so to actually see the glyphs. But in that moment, I just happened to be there, and unknowingly at a time when the moon was coming to the equinox point, moving from 2959 Pisces to Aries in that moment. And I saw the moon rise right above the principal shoot of petroglyphs here. as I went back and saw that the sun did the following March equinox. This is March 19th, 2016, with the sun rising exactly above the principal line of petroglyphs at this sacred site, confirming what I had seen when I saw the moon do this, that this is a calendar. East of here is Haleakala, the house of the sun, a gigantic volcano. You cannot see the sunrise on the horizon, so you can't track this type of movement as many ancient sites do. They actually keep the days of the year by watching where the sun is rising on the horizon, or the moon, especially the full moon. And that's a tale for another time. But here in Hawaii, it would most likely be the full moon rather than the sun. So again, another time, let's talk about that, maybe lunar standstills. But I'm sure what's happening, this sun, I know, I took this picture, rose right above this principal shoot at equinox time. And I'm guessing, and I need to go back and spend more time in Hawaii, which I'm not afraid to do, by the way, and watch the sun rise on summer solstice, which I believe will happen there, and winter solstice here. And what this is, and this is something that we see utilized by ancients in America, like all around the globe, it's called a false horizon, right? So this wasn't built by human, right? This was here, but you have this flat horizon where the sun's going to rise. It literally rises depending on how close you're standing to the rock at like 10 to 11 a.m., which is cool because you can be on like Hawaii time, stay up, watch the stars late night as I do, and then still get up here and see sunrise. You cannot see sunrise on the horizon because Haleakala, there's a giant mountain east of here. And even if you have horizons in Hawaii, often there's a lot of clouds there, right? In most places we have mountains or hills. I mean, this is one of the reasons why the 12th house is hidden things, because literally there are physical nature hiding the 12th house from our view, yeah? So with a false horizon, you can track this azimuthal motion of the sun during the year, a little bit later in the day, and in less of a space, less wide of a space. It's a really genius mechanism. And I'm out to prove this in a few other places on Hawaii. We're not heathens drawing pictures or sacrificing humans. This is the stuff that comes down to us. It's so sad. And I hope anyway, that at least if I can show, as many have, that these sacred sites are aligned to the astronomy, the movement of the sun, moon during the course of the year, month, of the zodiac during the course of the day, that maybe the academics will release this, which just really feels like this transmission to keep maybe justification of genocide and such. Anyway, that's again maybe getting more political than we want to get, maybe not. So learning the rise and the reach and the rest and the root, practicing with them, connecting to them, is something that has been so profound for me to connect to astrology. The ancients were doing this not only, I believe, to track the sun's movement so we can know what time we are in the year, so we can know when to plant the corn and have ceremony. But why have ceremony at these times? Because astrology, energies, correspondences, the marriage of heaven and earth, as above, so below, right? And these directions, I'm sure, are the source of our tropical zodiac, which we know to be very, very real. Each have their own energy. So again, this is a Northern Hemisphere image, rising in the east, reaching in the south, resting in the west, rooting in the north. Southern Hemisphere, rising in the east, reaching in the north, resting in the west, rooting in the south. In my practice, I often love to share, is I just go to these directions at night. I learn from the sky. I've learned them from different teachers of different shamanic traditions, and that's been great and helpful. But I ask East to teach me East. So as the sun is setting, I'll go east and just give my heart to the east and say this: I'm Brett and I give myself to you, East. Will you please give yourself to me? And I'll just sit and watch, bring a lot of blankets and stuff. I'll spend at least 4 hours and just receive the East by watching what East does. The East only ups, Because why? Because the earth is falling in that direction. It's a pretty Gemini contemplation there, isn't it? And then I'll move sunwise, which in the Northern Hemisphere is from the east to the south. in the southern hemisphere from the east to the north. The next day or the next day, I can go out and give myself to the reach and watch what the reach does. Very different than the rise. Next time, give myself to the rest, like this, yeah? And it's amazing what the sky will teach you directly, and it will be different than what I teach you or anyone teaches you. I always love to say, I'm not here to teach my astrology. I'm here to further remind you to remember yours. The sky, the planets, they will teach you your astrology. They will remind you to remember yours, and that's the great gift you can give to this craft, which is ever evolving. We each have our gift to give, yeah? So why that? Well, east, the rise, the reach in the northern hemisphere is due south, exactly due south on the meridian line. When the sun's south, that's midday. The root, the middle of the night, is in the northern hemisphere due north. That's when you feel that cold in your bones. You've been cold, but suddenly freezing, because by Aristotelian temperament, and a really wonderful study and a very practical way to connect to this transmission and that we use in astrology, especially older astrology, temperament is to spend a night outside, or preferably 4, and just feel the energies change, literally with temperature. So due north, we move, I'm sure, from earth to water and the Aristotelian temperament transmission, because we go from cold and dry to cold and wet, and you can really feel it freezing. So midheaven, northern hemisphere, due south, I see bottom of the heavens due north. But the rise and the rise and the rest are not due east and due west. They are east-ish and west-ish. Why? Iacos, rudder, declination, azimuth, the sun dance, the moon dance, the zodiac, the signs dancing on the horizon. The signs live in specific places, the rudder. So here's an image for sunset where I am tonight. As soon as we end here, I've got a short reading out in nature, which is the best way I love to do them. So I'll climb up and watch the sunset and see if I can spy Mercury and Saturn. I was able to see them a couple of nights ago. It was amazing. They were exactly conjunct at the same time. They were so far from one another. It's a really wonderful teacher. We don't see that in our charts. You have to know where their nodes are, and that's a story for another time as well. So here we go, 5 p.m. San Anselmo on November 30th, 2017, Jupiter's Day. And I want to show this to you actually without planets. Because why in the chart, in this chart, are the 7th, 8th, 9th houses so much smaller than the 10th, 11th, 12th? And therefore the 1st, 2nd, 3rd so much smaller than the 4th, 5th, 6th? Why does it look like the midheaven is fallen towards the west? That's not happening. The midheaven is always due south in the northern hemisphere. So why this? And the answer is this, Iacos, the rudder. If we look at this as an equal sign chart, we always get a perfect cross. We get the perfect medicine wheel. The earth. Yeah, this is the earth glyph, the cross of matter inside the circle of spirit. The horizon crossing the meridian, the circle of spirit is the zodiac. Earth is the center of our charts, and we measure astrology from the center of Earth, the one place where we are all connected, not from the surface where we can see the planetary happenings. The medicine wheel. This is the source of our tropical astrology. Seasons are a result, but if it was purely a seasonal system, then we would have to flip Leo energy and Aquarius energy between the hemispheres, and we know it doesn't work like that. Why would the sun rule Leo in the southern hemisphere when that's the middle of winter? It's a very interesting question, and ones we usually will run away from, and people will just say, oh, as above, so below, you know? I'm really after the physical mechanism for this thing. I do honor that what we're getting after is something spiritual, soul. It's above just matter alone, but of course it also lives in matter, for as below, so above, as Hermes told us first. And the directions feel to me to be at the very root, not only of our seasons, but also of our tropical astrology. The cusp of the 10th house on an equal sign chart is called the nonagesimal, which simply means 90 degrees from the horizon. 90 degrees from the ascendant and descendant. And it's a very important part if you're learning to see the chart in the sky, which is one of my favorite things to do and to teach. So we know the equal sign system, right? 1239 Gemini in the rise here. Second house is going to start 1239 Cancer, etc., meaning that the cusp of the 10th is going to be 1239 Pisces, mutable, squaring Gemini ascendant, Sagittarius descendant, yeah. Non-adjustable, 90 degrees from the ascendant descendant. Why is that so far from this Aquarius midheaven? I'm in a different sign. And the answer is the Iacus, the rudder. So here's a porphyry chart again. Pinch 7th, 8th, 9th. Why does it look like the midheaven is falling towards the west? It's not. Here's an image of this same moment in time on a different kind of chart, an astronomy chart. Bring in the cardinal directions. The meridian line, north-south. I'm looking northern hemisphere here, so I'm facing due south at the midheaven, the place where the ecliptic, the zodiac, the path of the sun, crosses the meridian. So I think you can see that the midheaven is not the highest point of the ecliptic here. That's one of the most common misconceptions of the midheaven. Some will teach you that it's directly above your head. That's very, very wrong. Though it can be right, in fact it is right, twice a day, only in tropical locations. Above the Tropic of Cancer, below the Tropic of Capricorn, the midheaven can never, ever, 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 ever be directly above your head. Another common misconception of the midheaven is that it's the highest point of the ecliptic at any given time. That's wrong. It is right everywhere, twice a day. The 2 times a day when either 0 Aries tropical or 0 Libra tropical are rising and setting. When the equinox points rise and set, we get a perfect cross inside the circle, and the midheaven is the non-adjustable is the high point. That's the point that's exactly between the ascendant, descendant. Why is it not the midheaven? Because of Iacus, because of the rudder. Look at where Gemini, 12 degrees Gemini at this time, is rising. It's not east. So a very common incorrect statement is that the ascendant is east. It depends what you think of east. When I hear east, because I'm tuned into that direction, I think due east, okay? Gemini rises, as we saw in that Anticia slides earlier, north of east. North of east. And you can see that here. Gemini is rising north of east. Sagittarius setting south of west. Yeah? And this is why the 7, 8, 9, which is from the descendant where the sun is there, south of west, is much smaller than the 10th, 11th, 12th. Because northeast, the cusp of the 12th first, the ascendant, is so much further than due south, from due south, than southwest, the descendant is from due south. Porphyry house systems, all we're doing is taking these quadrants, we see the 3rd and the 4th quadrants here, and we're splitting them into 3 equal slices of space along the ecliptic. So from the descendant to the midheaven, yeah, there, 7, 8, 9, from the midheaven to the ascendant, 10, 11, 12. And that's why 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 are different sizes. 7, 8, and 9 are all the same geometric size in a porphyry system, as we know. 10, 11, 12, all the same size, but not the same size as one another. When we figure out their geometry, we can project it to the bottom of the chart, and 1, 2, 3 equals 7, 8, 9, geometrically speaking, in some senses. And why it also isn't is a story for another time. But 10, 11, 12, 4, 5, 6 having the same geometry on the chart, right? But why does it look like the midheaven's falling to the west when it's always due south? It's because we cannot show the rudder on 2 dimensions. On a piece of paper, on a computer screen, we can't show that the ascendant is actually moving towards the north or towards the south during the course of the day. We would have to show the ascendant coming towards our face or into the screen away from us, and we can't do that. So what we show is the movement of the midheaven left and right. So when the midheaven is towards the right in the Northern Hemisphere like this, what it actually means, because the midheaven is always due south, what it means is that the descendant is closer to the midheaven than the ascendant. And that means that the descendant is south of west. And this is true for all of the signs in Northern Hemisphere, fall and winter. So when spring, Gemini, or summer signs are rising, we'll see a larger 10th, 11th, 12th. Does that make sense? I hope so. So there's the midheaven. The peak of the ecliptic is the nonagesimal, is the cusp of the equal 10th. Yeah? And at this time at sunset, it will be Neptune. And we can see it on the chart. So here's a porphyry chart, but with the nonagesimal shown, which is very easy to see in a chart when we use what are called European style houses like this, right? Where we allow the midheaven to slip. Directly square to the midheaven, or sorry, ascendant descendant is the nonagesimal, and that's Neptune. Yeah. We're going to need some of those big telescopes to see Neptune though, won't we? All right. So we've been looking at images from Stellarium, an astronomy software that you can play. You can download Stellarium for Mac or PC, no charge, stellarium.org. I really highly recommend it. Cast your birth chart. See which constellations your planets were aligned to. What are the starry stories that those star patterns have held for so long? What fixed stars? And wouldn't, again, Mars at Spica be somehow more powerful than Mars at Arcturus when Spica is so much closer to Mars at this time? I'm going to be teaching a course that will certainly cover how to play with Stellarium, called Sacred Astronomy for Astrologers. It's beginning in January. It'll be every week on Wednesdays, 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. Everything will be recorded so you can see it later. You don't have to catch them live. 6 weeks, 6 Wednesdays, ending on Valentine's Day, where we will celebrate the marriage of heaven and earth. And every other week, we'll have a question and answer on Saturdays, maybe to work with participants in different hemispheres or different time zones. We've got like 30 signups so far, which is great. We're a really good group, and I'll probably split it up into a couple different groups also. And there'll be a Facebook community and all sorts of things. You can find out more about that at my website, which is morethan.astrology.com. When I get on my game and get caught up with time, I'll also show some other things there. I'll be speaking for OPA Live coming up here on December 10th. It's going to be a really great transmission. It's free for organization for professional astrology members, or $25. If you're not a member, you can see it at OPA. I'll be writing a column for them next year for the Career Astrologer of Astronomy for Astrologers. There's a Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. That's where I got my start. There's a free online summit coming up that you can sign up for at shamanicastrology.com with all sorts of great astrologers and healers and feelers from all walks of the way. So I hope you'll check that out. Day after day throughout December. Also Astrology Hub, a wonderful community I know many of you know about, hopefully all of you do. I'll be transmitting for their Saturn and Capricorn broadcast coming up. You can find out when and where that will be at astrologyhub.com. We'll also do a 2018 forecast with I think 11 or 12 other astrologers with them next year. A Cosmic Intelligence Agency Venus webinar. Yulia Simas and Ariel Gutman and I teamed up to speak about the star point of Venus and Aries in her synodic cycle in March, I think it was. And now we'll be broadcasting, I believe, on January 3rd to speak about the Capricorn exterior or superior star point. So hope you'll come check that out. I'm speaking at NORWAC in Seattle, which is March next year. And again, you can find out about all this stuff at my website, which is morethan.astrology.com. And it has been an extreme pleasure to speak with you guys once again. I'm 60 minutes exactly. So I'm going to stop my share here. And Linda, if you want to open cameras or whatever, it looks like I think they will be. I know we really don't have much time, but if, I don't know, Linda, should I ask anyone to ask questions, or do we want to shut it down?
Yeah, sure. How about 3 minutes? 3 minutes. Any questions, anyone? Please go ahead.
Well, a cup of tea to you. And as it is always with EA Zoom meetings, we know this will be available for your review on YouTube for such a long time. And let me just say that it's a great honor to be able to share here. I really appreciate it. And I love what EA Zoom meetings are doing for all of us. So thank you, Linda and Wanda and everybody that's involved with this.
Great. Absolute pleasure.
Amazing sharing.
Lauren, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you. Oh, Gemini, that was so refreshing and interesting, things that you wouldn't notice until you brought it to our attention, and it was really interesting. And the photographs, the slide presentation was gorgeous. I just loved it.
Oh, thank you so much, Lauren. Yeah, and I hope you guys will join me for this video course. We're going to take things like declination and antitia and I mean, so many different things and bring it out of just textbook learning memorization into reality. And I'll be sharing on the small screen, but all with embodiment practices and invitations to go out to the big screen, to go outside and really connect to the astronomy, which is half of astrology. The other half is correspondences, which is what most of us are practicing. Yeah.
Brett, I had one question. With the Antisha, what if the ascendant is the same, is Scorpio as the sun? So the ascendant and the sun are in Antisha.
So you're saying your ascendant is Scorpio, but then the sun's in Aquarius, maybe? So
no,
they're
opposite. My sun is in Scorpio, and my ascendant is in Aquarius.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have time to get into the astrological delineations of Antisha. I would really encourage you to check it out. There's amazing things that have been written. A lot of what's been written, though, is trying to transmit what it actually is. Why should Scorpio and Aquarius have any relationship besides a square and everything that means, right? Some have said it's kind of like the shadow essence, one sign to the other. And I found it to really be activated and alive in my charts. And when planets even transit the Antisha points of some of my natal planets, really amazing things come in, even when it's at some inconjunct or something you might not expect so much energy to show. So yeah, I encourage you to check out Antisha. I mean, tends to be more of traditional astrologers who are speaking about it. And my job today, and in so many ways, is just say, oh yeah, okay, cool. Here's these many ways we can delineate, but here's what it is. And so I just really invite people to get to what it is and to experience, oh wait, Scorpio and Aquarius, they rise in the same place. They set in the same place. They reach the same height. They make the same length of shadow. There's this amazing relationship between those two signs that nature teaches us if we spend the time and go outside.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Yes. One final question from, she was saying great. Yes. Anyone else?
Hi, friends. Thanks for joining live and in the future of space-time. It's been so nice to present again, and we'll see you out in the cosmos.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gemini Brett. Great astro information. Thanks from all of us. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brett. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.